I still am earlier than somebody who is joining, just starting to stack sats today, right? Early is a relative term. Like there's always going to be someone, unless you're Satoshi, there was always somebody who was into Bitcoin before you were. That's just the reality of it, right? And so trying to benchmark yourself against other people in terms of earliness, well, they bought it at 300 or they bought it 3,000 or 30,000 or 300,000 in the future, that's just going to be a recipe for unhappiness. What you should do is try to focus on you yourself, what you can accomplish, what value you can create, back to that conversation, to figure out how can I stack as many sats as humanly possible so that I can ultimately have that freedom over my time in the future, because you probably don't have it now. And for perspective on just how early we are, there's a great chart. I always love to share this with people, especially if they bring up this question of, am I too late? And it's a chart that Jesse Myers Croesus put out that basically shows the total wealth of the world, total global asset value. And the total global asset value right now is $1,000 trillion, 1,000 trillion. That is an unfathomably large number. And with Bitcoin, okay, it's at $100 and some thousand per coin right now. That may seem very expensive until you look at it from the perspective of the total addressable market of Bitcoin, which is all the assets, all the wealth in the world. Bitcoin is only around $2 trillion versus 1,000 trillion of total global asset value. So that's 0.2% of all the world's wealth is currently in Bitcoin. 0.2%, not even a quarter of a percent. That's insane. That's so very tiny. Gold is 22 trillion, right? So over 10 times Bitcoin right now. Arts, cars, collectibles of different sorts, they're 27 trillion maybe. And then you look at the equities market, that's like 135 trillion. Real estate, 370 trillion versus Bitcoin, only 2 trillion. Bonds, 318 trillion. And then overall just money, fiat money, currency, 129 trillion. So again, $1,000 trillion in total global asset value. Bitcoin is 2 trillion, 0.2% of that. I don't know how you can possibly look at that and say, I'm late. Like, you're not late at all. We're just getting started. In terms of the adoption curve, we're still in the innovators phase. We haven't even reached the early adopter phase yet. You know this because still just such a tiny, tiny fraction of people own Bitcoin. Another way to look at this, there's like 60,000 publicly traded companies in the world, something around there, give or take, 60,000. The companies that currently hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet, it's like less than 150. 60,000 companies versus less than 150. If you own even a few sats right now, just a few sats, you own more Bitcoin than 99% plus of all the publicly traded companies in the world. That's not even to get into how can you look at these numbers and say, I'm too late? So I would encourage people, don't measure Bitcoin by this dollar stick, this dollar ruler, right? It's a terrible way to measure it. Measure it versus what is all of the market that Bitcoin is going to completely suck into this black hole, because that's what's happening. Bitcoin is gobbling up all of the value that is put into these terrible instruments that don't actually work, these instruments that only hold so much value because our fiat system is so broken, like real estate. $370 trillion of the total global asset value is in real estate, 2 trillion in Bitcoin. The only reason that real estate holds $370 trillion is because our money is so broken. People have to look for different places to put their capital, and they put it in real estate into second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th homes because the money's broken and it's not a reliable store of value. Fiat currency is a terrible store of value. So they look for alternates. Real estate is one of those. But real estate's not a good store of value either. Buildings fall apart, they deteriorate. Your home is not an asset, it's a liability. Like Bitcoin is an asset, it's a pristine asset. It also happens to be completely uncensorable, distributed around the entire globe. It's completely decentralized, and it allows you to send value across the internet to anyone at any time for any reason, and no one can stop you. So in addition to being completely finite, 21 million, that's all that'll ever exist, nobody can stop you from using it. Nobody can stop you from transacting in it. That alone, I think, is worth a far larger percent of the total $1,000 trillion in global assets than the current 0.2% that Bitcoin's worth. Imagine when Bitcoin's worth 1%. Imagine when it's worth 5, 10, 20. What total percent of the global assets should Bitcoin be? I don't know, but I know that it's a lot higher than 0.2%.
Money is 50% of every transaction. So what about 50%?
That sounds good to me. That sounds great to me. We've got a long way to go.
It's super interesting when you break it down really, really good. Like I love how you break it down and like show it. And for the people that saw the chart, it was an older chart. So your numbers that you mentioned were a little bit higher than the chart I showed, because my chart from Jesse Myers was like with 900 trillion. So it's a little bit on the old. I think he updated that like a few months ago, or like this year somewhere. But it's interesting when you think about how early we are, because there are two things that I always mention. The first thing is go out on the street and ask 100 random strangers what Bitcoin is. And if they can answer that nicely, ask them what is a difficulty adjustment, what is a UTXO, and what's the block size. If they can answer those three questions, that's great. But I don't think you will find one person. You have to ask a lot of people to find one person that can answer those questions in a good way. And that's not about opinions, like answering the question of like, what is a Bitcoin UTXO? That's just facts. Like there's no opinion in that. And they're like, okay, not even most Bitcoiners, I think, can answer those questions. If you make a survey on Coinbase and may send that test out to most Bitcoiners, I think most people wouldn't even be able to answer that. So we have a situation where this is the most obvious thing right now to do, and we can go into the reasons why Bitcoin is so obvious and why it will be developing like that. But then you also have the same time this obvious thing nobody understands and nobody is educated on, and nobody is paying attention as much as they should. This is just the most asymmetric bet I've ever seen in my whole life.
I couldn't agree more. And it's, I think that's why people like you and I and all the other educators and podcasters and things out there who, there are a lot of people writing code, and that's great. And we need as many of those as possible. But I think that the education piece here is still so important from a general adoption standpoint. Like, companies are buying Bitcoin. Nation states are and will continue to buy Bitcoin. Everybody, from the individual to the company, to the pension fund, to the nation state, everybody, to the AI agents, like everybody will want Bitcoin because Bitcoin is winning. And so what I view as really important right now is to try and educate as many people as possible, to try and put out, that's why we always need more Bitcoin podcasts, because there's so much bad information out there about finance and about investing and all these things. And they make it so unnecessarily complicated. And I think that's one of the reasons you see, financial advisors, financial planners, whatever they are, typically they've been very, very reticent to recommend Bitcoin exposure because it's risky. And that doesn't fit our, that's not something that we recommend at our firm. That tide is shifting a little bit now, right? But the reason is because it's just so simple. Like, you can just create value for society, take the infinitely printable paper money that you've received for that value, and you can buy the only provably scarce asset in the history of mankind with that printed paper money. That's incredible. And then you can just wait. You can just hold on to it. You can, I try to spend Bitcoin too. I spend Bitcoin every day when I zap sats on Nostr. I try to spend Bitcoin at merchants. I try to spend Bitcoin whenever I'm around Bitcoiners and spend it online. There's a lot of ways to do that now. But even if you're just holding it, you are going to outperform the vast majority of the best hedge funds and asset managers and financial planners in the entire world, just by doing this one simple trick, like for getting incredibly wealthy. is to create value, save the value of your time and energy in Bitcoin, and then live your life. Like that's what, money is not the end in and of itself. Money is a means to the end. The end is having the freedom over your time, the freedom to take care of your family, the freedom to provide a life for yourself and for your loved ones that is the one that you want and not the one that somebody else is forcing you to have because you're living on a broken money standard. When you live on a sound money standard, when you live on a Bitcoin standard, everything gets cheaper forever. When you live on a broken money fiat standard, everything gets more expensive forever. Which one would you rather have? And if you ask that question, the choice should be really obvious. And that's why I think, again, education is so important, because we need to get this message to as many people as can possibly hear it. Because again, the institutions aren't coming anymore, they're here. The nation states aren't just coming anymore, they're here. Individuals are still have the chance to front run all of these corporations, all of these nation states. Like, you should take that chance, take that opportunity and save in Bitcoin, and your life will get better because of it.
You can still buy 0.01 Bitcoin and have more Bitcoin than Germany.
Yeah. Yep. Which I think, which is a great thing. That's going to be looked back on. The history books will write about it as a catastrophic blunder that was worth unimaginable. The opportunity cost of that blunder was massive. So, yeah. But again, that freed up some more sats for the average individual. So I think that's a good thing.
How do you actually look at nations buying Bitcoin? I mean, it's a small thing right now. Like most nations just confiscate Bitcoin. That's not really meaning buying Bitcoin. But America might do it, especially now as they got to know they have less Bitcoin than they thought they have. Is that something? I mean, obviously it's inevitable. Like at some point, everyone will buy Bitcoin, also nation states. But is that something that fits into the Bitcoin ethos?
I think whether or not it fits into the Bitcoin ethos is kind of it's the wrong question. Maybe I think that, as you said, nation states buying Bitcoin is inevitable. Countries buying Bitcoin is inevitable. Anyone from the individual up to the nation state level, everyone is going to want Bitcoin because Bitcoin is winning. Now, if Bitcoin was losing, if Bitcoin was not, eating the world right now, nation states wouldn't care. They wouldn't want it. Companies wouldn't care. They wouldn't want it. People wouldn't care. They wouldn't want it. But Bitcoin is winning. Bitcoin is winning, and it's happening, gradually, and then it will happen very, very suddenly. And as Bitcoin reprices the entire world, because it is the only measuring stick that actually makes sense. It's the only measuring stick that maintains its length. It's 21 million. Every fiat measuring stick just expands and expands and bloats. How can you measure the value of your time and energy with that? You can't. You can't make economic calculations when your monetary measuring stick continues to grow. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I think, people are right to be, let's say, wary of nation states getting into Bitcoin. But it's important to remember that Bitcoin does not need nation states to succeed. Bitcoin is already succeeding. Nation states need Bitcoin if they are going to want to survive. And that's, I think, the important thing. Politicians, Bitcoin doesn't need them. But politicians do need Bitcoin, and they need Bitcoiners, because Bitcoiners are rapidly increasing our political clout because our economic energy is growing. And again, this is a natural byproduct of Bitcoin's continued success. So we should expect that to accelerate. We should expect more nation states to look at strategies to accumulate Bitcoin. We should look at more companies to do the same. This was always going to happen if Bitcoin was going to succeed. There is no situation where Bitcoin can be the global reserve money, where we can experience hyper Bitcoinization, and somehow all of the nation states and all the corporations say, no, sorry, not interested. It just can't work like that. That doesn't make any sense. So while this was an inevitable byproduct, in my opinion, of Bitcoin's success, it should also be a wake-up call to people who are still not stacking sats to say, look, something's clearly happening here. If you haven't looked at Bitcoin yet, ask yourself why. Check your prior assumptions. Do a little bit more research, listen to some more podcasts, check your assumptions at the door, leave them there, and come in with an open mind and realize that maybe there's a reason that this asset class has gone from zero to $2 trillion plus in around 16 years. That's incredible. And then also realize that it still has the rest of the $1,000 trillion in global asset value that it's going to start eating up chunk by chunk. So you probably want, it may make sense to get some in case it catches on, to quote Satoshi.
Yeah, and it's I think it's like a 250x from here when it gets to 50%, which is kind of really weird to think about. To think about the scale of Bitcoin in the assumption that it gets to 50%. But you bring up something really interesting of like it's inevitable that all the individual players and all the group players, institutional player, and also the nation state players will adopt it. Which brings me kind of to the thing where how, like right now, I think we have done all the work. We have now banks on the Bitcoin side, like some of the banks, but not a lot. We have some institutions with MicroStrategy companies. We have ETFs. We have BlackRock. We have now starting some nation states. There's nothing really left to really unlock outside of 99% of all of them in individual categories. So what I'm getting towards is we've kind of laid out all the buckets and now we're just like trying to fill them, which is kind of where I'm seeing the future over the next 5 to 10 years, where we're just seeing more publicly traded companies getting in Bitcoin, more people getting in Bitcoin, more nation states getting in Bitcoin, more institutions, more ETFs, more products. Is that the way forward where we kind of laid the groundwork the last 16 years and now it's just like building on that with more education? That's why education, I think, is still, if you want to do something in Bitcoin, education is probably the easiest and the most important path. Like building a product and service around Bitcoin is a lot harder than just educating other people. And it's the most important thing that you could do. But the question I was trying to get is, how do you see the way forward from now now we got to 2 trillion in 16 years. How do we get from 2 trillion to like 100 trillion, like 200 trillion market cap? Is it just more of the same that we already have?
I think in terms of monetization, that's going to naturally happen now because the Overton window has been blown wide open. Bitcoin is in the conversation right now. At the highest levels down to the lowest levels, Bitcoin is part of this conversation. If you're managing any amount of money and you're not talking and thinking about Bitcoin, you're making a mistake. There used to be a career risk to bringing up Bitcoin. If you worked in some big company or you were managing assets for others, maybe there was a career risk to bringing up this magic internet money. Now there's a career risk to not bringing it up, to not doing your duty to educate others if you're managing other people's money, but also not doing your duty to yourself. Like it's not so much a career risk as it is a life risk, right? You're risking yourself being left in the dust as you sit on a melting ice cube of fiat and other inferior assets like real estate. And Bitcoin leaves all of that in the dust. The thing I wanted to say though is, so there's kind of the monetary side of this, let's say, in terms of just the monetization of Bitcoin as Bitcoin drains more and more value from the fiat system. A really important thing, right? I mean, always in the past, in the present right now, but especially as we go into the future, especially as Bitcoin right now is being viewed as this, just this digital gold. And I think that's fine that you can view Bitcoin as digital gold. You can think about it however you want. Bitcoin doesn't care. But Bitcoin is so much more than that. Like, gold is not a good medium of exchange. Bitcoin is an incredible medium of exchange. Bitcoin is weightless gold that you can send to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and no one can stop you. That is incredible. So I think that it's important to recognize that Bitcoin does need to be used as a medium of exchange, in my opinion, in order for it to truly reach its full potential and promise. And Bitcoin needs to be, I think it's also its monetary premium is tied to its ability to be used as uncensorable money. Like if you can't use Bitcoin in that way, I think a lot of that monetary premium is no longer justified. And so I think what is really important right now is for those who are builders to continue building incredible open source software. Folks like Callie, who's working on eCash with Cashew, and all of the things that have blossomed out of that. The Lightning Network as well. All of these different second and third layer technologies, Fedimint, to give another example, these are really important because they also add different things. For instance, like in this case of Cashew and eCash, like near perfect privacy that does not exist on Bitcoin's base chain. It doesn't exist on layer one. Bitcoin is pseudonymous, but because of this incredibly destructive KYC AML apparatus, so many people have an ID scan tied to their Bitcoin purchases through Coinbase or through any regulated exchange. That's not a great thing. It's okay. It happened. It's happened. But having these other layers that allow people to transact, first of all, faster, cheaper, and then with much, much greater privacy, that's incredibly important. And I think it's also very important to support these other sort of tangential use cases of Bitcoin, these other protocols, for instance, Nostr. The fact that you can zap Bitcoin frictionlessly on Nostr to send value when you find something valuable in a social context, that's incredibly important. And having that censorship-resistant communication protocol alongside of a censorship-resistant monetary protocol is incredibly powerful, because we don't want to live in a world where, where I forget who said this, maybe it was American Hodl, but we're all fabulously wealthy, but like we're depressed because Bitcoin's honestly failed in some of its initial promise, which is to be able to give us an uncensorable, unfuckable money. Like that's we need that. Like you are going to want that sooner or later. We are in the middle of a fourth turning. We are at a convergence of different cycles right now. Long-term debt cycles, fiat monetary cycles, Polybius's anacyclosis, Kondratiative waves, all of these different things are converging into this time, and we happen to be alive during it. What you want to make sure is that you have the tools at your disposal to weather the storm that is coming, because it is coming. There's not going to be any way around it. I'm bullish on the future of humanity. I'm bullish on the future that is to come, but it's going to be really messy to get there. And you're going to want to make sure you have the open source freedom tech tools like Bitcoin, like Nostr, like eCash to get you through that storm.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.